Hey, welcome to the Black Knight Nation podcast. I'm your host, Sal Interdonato. The Black Knight Nation podcast is sponsored by Higher Echelon, a company that is ran by Joe Ross. Joe Ross is a former Army fullback, former Army assistant coach, former Army officer. He was a guest on the Black Knight Nation podcast, and we're back on the Black Knight Nation podcast. We took a little bit of a hiatus, but we brought in a great guest tonight to talk some Army football and to talk maybe even beyond Army football. John Bonamego. John, thanks so much for joining us tonight.
Oh, it's a great pleasure to be here. It's truly an honor. Thank you for asking. And man, I can't wait to see some of these questions come in.
Yeah, guys, if you're watching right now and you have any questions for myself or John, please send them in. We'll get them answered. We'll get to talk about John's time as an Army assistant. We'll get to talk about maybe John's time before that because he has a little bit of an Army background in his family. And we'll talk about a bunch of stuff. If you're watching right now, check out our website, blackknightnation.com. I just posted a story on a recruit from South Carolina, defensive lineman Ben Britton, who committed to the Black Knights. Going to have a few more recruiting stories up there as soon as I can. And subscribe on the Black Knight Nation YouTube channel and give us a thumbs up. John, usually we start off with former Army football players about their path to West Point and how they got to West Point. But maybe we could talk a little bit about your background first of all, because your dad was in the Army, right? So I mean,
Cool.
did you had a little bit of experience before you got to West Point about maybe what what it was all about?
Yeah, I mean, yeah, I grew up an Army brat. My dad enlisted in the Army straight out of high school, qualified for OCS. So we kind of grew up going from base to base, a couple in Fort Riley, Kansas, Fort Benning, Georgia. Gosh, North Carolina. We were in Fort Kaiserslautern, Germany, Vicenza, Italy. Dad did two tours of Vietnam, so um, we were back in Michigan during those times. But yeah, it was. The military was definitely in our bloodlines. I mean, my brother was in the Marine Corps. Uh, Sister married an Air Force officer, and my mom really is the superstar of the family. She was a profession. Uh, she was a station manager with the Red Cross. Kind of worked her way up from a volunteer to assistant, say station manager, and really the last 10 years of her career, she was pretty much deployed wherever we had boots on the ground. So she was in the first Gulf War. She did some time in Somalia, some Haiti, Bosnia, Kosovo. Um, Always there in support of the of our troops with the Red Cross.
So you're growing up with Army in your family. Was there coming for you as younger and out of high school? Did you ever consider that route
I,
or no?
I did. I actually started the process of applying to West Point, but then, you know, some other. It's all about recruiting. I think if I had been recruited, I probably would have been there. But quite honestly, I don't think I had the academics to get into West Point. I'd have been a prep schooler for sure, and you know, I guess it probably took the easier way and went to a Midwest directional school.
Right, right. We'll get into that a little later about going back there. So how do you end up at Army? Bob Sutton's the coach at Army. How do you end up at West Point as a coach?
Well, really, there were a couple guys on the staff that I knew, namely Bill Sheridan. I'd worked with Bill at the University of Maine, and there was a job opening, and that's the way it is a lot of times in life, and certainly in coaching. You never really get the job that you're looking for. Uh, I would always advise people, young coaches, just do the best job you can where you're at, and then the jobs will find you, because that's how it's happened with me pretty much my entire career. I just got a call one day, and it was Bill Sheridan said, "Hey, we're going to have a position open. Are you interested?" And one thing led to another. Ended up there on a quick interview. I think it was a Valentine's Day interview, and was offered the job, and then the rest is history.
Yeah, no doubt. So you had experience coaching at Maine. And where were your other stops before West Point?
It was really Maine and Lehigh. I was at Lehigh University for a year before I went to Army.
How does one start coaching? Like, how did you get your coaching? How did you start? How did you
Well,
get involved in it?
I was fortunate. I think right around my sophomore year in college, I started to really think about coaching as a career. Finished up my undergrad, and then really my junior senior year started to ask a lot of questions. We had a coach on our staff that came on board at Central right as I was finishing up by the name of Paul Alexander, and Coach Alexander was a great mentor for me. Paul ended up coaching the National Football League for over 30 years, and Paul was like, you need to be a graduate. You have to be a graduate assistant. Um, if you want to be at the Division I level, you got to try to get to the Division I level. So I literally wrote to every single Division I school in the country. Um, I think there was 120 at the time, and got 120 rejection letters. Didn't know there were rejection letters. I actually thought that they were going to keep my resume on file because why wouldn't they want me? So I still have those in a book. Um, it's good. It served as good motivation for me over the years, but again, it just kind of, I'll go back to Bill Sheridan. I worked the Michigan camp um, as a volunteer. Coach Sheridan had been a graduate assistant at Michigan. He was at the University of Maine. They were looking for a graduate assistant. Uh, he called Paul Alexander. Paul Alexander said, "You need to hire John Bonamego." And Bill Sheridan said, "Yeah, I met him at the Michigan camp." And again, it's your reputation is so important, really, in any business. But how you treat people, I think, on a daily basis is, um, it's critical. For you just for your own self-image and your self-worth, but also, you never know who's going to be where at some point. I remember Dickie Hall had a sign in the locker room down in the equipment room at Army that said, be careful, the ass you chew today might be the one you have to kiss tomorrow. So apologize for the language, but
All
you
good.
know, I just really was fortunate that I think my mom really, watching her, how people were with her in the Red Cross. She was always there to help people. Really a servant leader, and I've really tried to model myself after my parents. I was fortunate to have great role models in my house.
So we talked about how you got to West Point. West Point is your first back then one A job, right? Now
Yep.
FCS, FBS, and back then, like you were saying before we jumped on here, I mean you wore a couple different hats you were wearing, right? You weren't just the special teams coordinator at the Army, you were also the recruiting coordinator at the Army.
Yeah.
So I mean, what was that transition like for you? What was like your first day on the job at Army, like, John?
I can't remember honestly. I know I started off as one of the restricted earnings positions. The first year I was with Coach Sheridan with the outside linebackers, and then in the spring moved to fullbacks with Coach Seymour. That's where I had Joe Ross in the meeting room, as of all people that you mentioned. So it was really in the spring. I think what happened was the NCAA had a rule where they were allowed to have your 9 full-time assistants plus a recruiting coordinator, but they eliminated the recruiting coordinator position. And so really it was Coach Sutton's brainchild. He said, you've done special teams, and you've worked really closely with Tim Mingy, who was the recruiting coordinator. We're going to combine those two jobs because we couldn't, at West Point, especially with the volume of of individuals that you need to vet, you just couldn't do it in like a normal place. There was it was too big of a job. You're talking about trying to recruit all 50 states. Uh, this was before, the internet was really being utilized in recruiting. There were no, I think the only recruiting service was Collegiate Sports Data, which was basically a state by state list of high schools and names. And then, you still had to vet those prospects academically, athletically, uh, and in every other way. So it worked out, and I told you off the air before we started. I think I was well into my fourth year before I took a vacation in the summertime. I just never felt like I could afford to leave. The worst time of day was when they would drop the mail off, because there'd just be, someone had to go through it, and that somebody was me. So
You didn't have any athletic interns at that point, did they, John? That you could get that
no,
assignment
no,
to,
but
or
no, but what we did have was and the guy who these guys were so valuable to us were the football managers. Those guys uh, did a tremendous amount of work for us in the off season and even during the season. Just kind of going through things. I mean, I can't take credit for this, but one of the things we used to do every year, and I got this from Tim Mingy, was we had a database of all the sports editors for every newspaper in the country, and I would go down to the athletic office and I would get a cash advance for like $350 in $1 bills. And we had a form letter that we sent out to every sports editor asking them for if they would please send us their all-star team. And so, you start getting these newspapers in, and by the time we got them, we weren't looking for, we weren't interested in the seniors. We were interested in the underclassmen. We would we would put those, those all of those names would get input into our system, and then they would be sent an athletic questionnaire, which I don't know how it is now, but back then the athletic questionnaire, once a prospective athlete completed one and sent it back in, that was the equivalent of someone filling out a pre-candidate questionnaire for admissions. So once that questionnaire, which a lot of times we might be the first school that a kid heard from back then, uh, but once they turned in the questionnaire, now they were in our system, and they were also in the admission system. So uh, it was a lot more labor intensive. And that's really where those managers helped out. They would open up a lot of that mail and highlight those lists and input that data. Man, we used to send out probably 300 VHS tapes, blank VHS tapes to high school coaches, and those would come back, and that would have those. In addition, they weren't. It wasn't just about like evaluating them; it was cataloging them and organizing them. So um, a lot of work. A lot of work, and I just remember, uh, shoot, the ladies that work in the office, Liz Schrammick, she was outstanding. Laura Drayton, um, Jen Guzman now. Jen was there. Yvette, they all helped out. They pitched in, but those managers did a lot of they did a lot of work for us.
yeah. And so, just fast forward real quick, when after your time at Army, you have a time in the NFL where you're assistant coach, but then you go back to your alma mater, and then you're dealing with a whole different world of recruiting, right? I
Yep.
mean, like now this is easy, right? You got this aced, right?
Yeah, it's funny because you get into the NFL, and you're a young coach, and you're like a quote college guy, right? And then no one really bothers to tap you and say, hey, you're not a college guy anymore, you're an NFL guy. And like a lot of the biggest things that I had to overcome was really before getting the job, because I really don't believe that recruiting has changed that much. It's still about having having a great product to sell, which to me, selling West Point and Army football was easy. It really, now, not that doesn't mean everybody was going to buy it, but it's a great institution. It's a phenomenal education. It's a historic football program. I mean, it's everything a young man could possibly want. So it was easy to sell Army football, but you also need to sell yourself. Now, I say it hasn't changed. It's changed from the methods that we use to like now you're DMing on Twitter, or you're making graphics and stuff, but it's still everything, it's always going to boil down to the personal connection, um, personal relationships, you know so when you walk in the door, you're selling yourself first, and then when you sell, if you can make that connection, then it's easy to sell your institution, because you should be passionate about it. I was very passionate about selling and recruiting to West Point, and then I was equally as, if not, just as passionate to sell Central Michigan as a head football coach there.
No doubt. We have a comment, Coach. We have Dan McElroy chiming in here saying, Coach Bono changed my life when he recruited me to play to Army. Hope all is well, Coach.
Thank you, Dan. And there's so many of those young men you know that still stay in touch. I mean, it's amazing. I got a text from Pat Work today.
Hmm.
I had a phone conversation with Ron Thomas just the other day. I stay in touch with Shane Graham and Eddie Stover, and
Hmm.
Jim Slomka's my boss now. So it's really, it really is a very tight knit fraternity for a lot of really very, very good real reasons. I mean, my hat goes off. I tip my hat to those guys still to this very day for what they mean to our country, for their service, and really for taking the hard path, taking the path that's less traveled. And there's a reason. There's a reason those guys are all successful when they leave the service, and it's not just because they graduated from West Point, but it's what they learned there, what they the different you know they have to endure a lot, a tremendous amount. And I don't think, even having coached there, um, I still I just have so much respect for all of those kids, for everything that they do.
Yeah, Pat Work and Ed Stover are former Army players that we've had on this podcast in prior episodes. I mean, just amazing. Ed Stover, man, he's great. He's got the personality of Ed Stover is like, man, he certainly will light up a room, no doubt. And
Yep.
Pat Work, what the things that he's still doing in the Army are really, really incredible. And
Super
man,
proud of
just some
him.
good stuff. Just some good
Yep.
stuff. Just when you're so you say you move around to positions and linebackers and fullbacks and that to like but I mean in the time that you're there, Bob Sutton's been the head coach for a while, and there's some firm ground there, and there's some success in the big rivalry game right against Navy and the like. What do you think just the state of Army football was when you were coaching there and in your years there? What was the vibe like, and what was the energy like with Army football?
I always felt the energy was outstanding. I really did. I think at that time, I think from a facility standpoint, we were a little bit behind the Air Force Academy. Coach DeBerry had been there, done a really good job, and I just think that unfortunately, or I guess fortunately, we've overcome that part of it. But that was the edge I always felt that Air Force had on Army. Um, that, and I thought the ability to maybe And I don't want to. I'm not certainly hope I don't want to offend anybody, but they have the ability maybe to glamorize the military service aspect of the commitment. So I just felt like the kids that we got, the kids that chose West Point, were were um, were extremely grounded. Um, there wasn't any question about it. I mean, their days suck. The best part of their days was probably, I don't want to speak for anybody, but coming up to Mikey Stadium for practice, which that in itself makes them different from from a lot of college football players that maybe don't view practice as a great thing. I think the way we practiced and the way we competed, uh, I never felt like we were, I never felt like we were ever out of it. I never felt like, oh man, we're going to get, outclassed. We had, you know, we had players that just had the ability to rise to the occasion, and it's just a tremendous credit to them, and you know, everything that they've learned as Army cadets.
We talked about a few, but I mean the players that were that lined up for Army during the time that you were there. I mean, some of the guys. I mean, just I look at Greg Gadson was there when you were there or no?
That Greg was before me. I know Greg. I got to meet Greg through
Yeah,
Mike Sullivan. Sully's Mike's Sully is my middle son's godfather. I wanted my son to I wanted to have him have an affiliation uh, with Army football that was something meaningful, and so Sully and I were working together with the Jaguars at that time, and so when Giovanni was born, Mike Sullivan became my son's godfather.
action. We talked about Pat work. We had you had the guys like Ben Kawika, Ronnie Makeda, guys like that.
Yeah,
I mean, just incredible people
yeah.
that we've had on the show before. And I mean, McElrath is before your time, or is McElrath during?
About 1 year. Yep, he had
Yeah,
just finished up. The year. My first season was '93. I think
yeah.
he was a class of '92, I believe.
Characters like Joel Davis were on the team, right? I mean,
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, I recruited Joel when I was at the University of Maine, and so I remember going to doing a home visit at his home, and he's from Binghamton, New York, and so
yes.
and he told me, he was like, Coach, I like you, you're a good guy, but I'm going to West Point, and I'm like, okay, that's great. Another great, probably the greatest recruiting story of all time was Anthony Bianchi.
Yeah, well, you got there. I was going to ask you about some good recruiting stories that you had at
Yeah.
Army since you were
Well,
heavily
well,
involved.
Bianchi. So what happened with Bianchi? He's from Tampa, and he takes a visit to Lehigh, an official visit, and I had already accepted the job at West Point, and but I stayed through the final recruiting weekend because I had a couple kids that I was recruiting I needed to finish up with. Now Anthony wasn't mine, but because of the last name, they asked me to go pick his dad up at the airport. So Mr. Bianchi and I hit it off really well. We're speaking Italian, and you're going back and forth, and he told me, he said, Signore Bonamego, you're a very good man. I really like you, but I'm just going to tell you, Lehigh is a very nice school, but my son Anthony is not going to go to Lehigh. My son Anthony is going to go. I'm just telling you right now, he's going to go to West Point. And I said, Mr. Bianchi, I'm going to tell you something. I'll be with your son uh, in West Point, when he gets there in the fall. And so we still laugh about that. And I think he's back at West Point, I believe, right now. Isn't he?
Yeah, Garrison Commander. Last time I
Yeah.
heard he was the Garrison Commander. Yeah,
Yeah.
pretty high position. Any other interesting stuff? Any other interesting recruiting
Gosh,
stories
I
you have?
mean, there's a bunch of them. Like but probably most of them we shouldn't probably tell on the air. I have a really good one about Eddie Stover, after he graduated. But again, the statutes of limitations probably up, but I probably shouldn't tell that one.
Well, it's different, right? When you go into a home of a recruit, even back then, it's different. There's a lot of things are going on in the world, and I mean, like you say, you can sell West Point, you can sell yourself, and some of the you're looking for some really special people that want to get one of the best educations that's possible, and also play a high level football too. So
Yes, there's no question. And I think, uh, I think you need you have to, it takes a person that can project out into the future, to someone who's maybe willing to um, sacrifice some of the freedoms that you would have on the short term for really more freedom on the back end. I mean, I don't know if it still holds true, but my number one line was that, a West Point graduate goes into the Army as a second lieutenant has more responsibility than 98% of all college graduates. And that includes people coming out of the Ivy League schools and whatever. And it's true. They're immediately put into positions that they've earned, that they're qualified and prepared for. But many times they're responsible for millions of dollars of equipment. They're leading people, and they're responsible for the safety of those people as well. So you can't undersell that. You can't undervalue how important that is. Just the leadership. Uh, the leadership aspect of it, the training, and then the practical experience of actually going out and doing it.
no doubt. Maybe we could shift a little bit and talk about some of the highlights for you as a coach at Army as far as on the field. I know there were some really late kicks and that some great like special teams plays while you were coach and stuff like that. Do any stick out? Do a few stick out for you as far as a game winning kick or a crucial play in
Well,
special teams when
all
you were
all
coach?
of the all of the Navy games stick out. Every single one of them because they were all so close and they, so many of those came down to a kick here or there, an extra point. But I think probably in beating Air Force at home at night uh, was probably one of the sweetest wins ever. It was '96, and I remember we had put in a return for them. It was just a double three kick out two, which is something that nearly everybody runs now. But at that time, you weren't seeing as much of it, and we really hadn't shown it and put it on film. And it was a really critical part in the game. And Air Force had scored to I think to get within 7 or 3, and they kick off to us, and then Ron Thomas was our returner, Speedy, and I mean he'll tell you. I used to tell him like, just don't get tackled by the kicker. Don't let the kicker tackle you. But it didn't score, but we break this return out, past midfield, and then end up going and scoring on that drive. And I remember, I kept the article. Coach DeBerry came out and said, probably the most frustrating thing was after we scored to get the game within 3 points, we allowed Army to return the ball past midfield. So um, that was probably the most satisfying win if you were going to pick one for me.
And you've had a long NFL career too, and when you put that win amongst some of the victories you had in even NFL, that's really saying something, Coach.
There isn't any question in my mind throughout my career, and even I mean, obviously having the opportunity to be a head coach, especially at your alma mater, is really special. But you know, I would not have had the career that I had in the NFL. I would not have been as successful as a head coach in college had I not spent the 6 years that I had at Army, because it was just such a tremendous learning environment for me, or laboratory. Um, Coach Sutton was awesome to work for, because he really, he trusted us, and he let us do our thing. He let us coach, and that's not to say that he didn't question things, or because he did, but it was always in a introspective way or healthy way. It was always healthy discussion. And really, when it came to special teams, he really let me pretty much do whatever I wanted to do. And so, a lot of the drill work, the fundamentals, I just learned, I learned so much, through trial and error while I was at Army. I mean, at that time, there just weren't really many special teams coordinators, put it that way, in college football, or, even in the NFL. I went in the NFL as a number two, as an assistant. And I think in '99, I think there was only two other teams that had assistants. So I was one of three. So it really, but I just learned, I remember, like, I always go back to Lombardi's quote, where he said he was a neophyte before he worked at West Point for Red Blake. And I, I feel the same way. I feel like I was a neophyte as a coach, prior to, earning my stripes at West Point and having the opportunity to work under Bob Sutton, and really on staffs that had phenomenal coaches. I mean, you look at where so many of those guys have ended up and been and gone, and it's amazing. It really is amazing that the collection of assistants, the number of assistants that Bob Sutton had that ended up coaching in the NFL, and I mean, and guys that are still doing really great things, and even you throw Benny Kawika in there. I mean, Benny's doing a great job. He's out in Denver now. I'm really proud of Ben. Ben was on the punt team, all 4 years. So, and just a lot of very fond memories, a lot of lessons learned, and a lot of important lessons learned. And again, it wasn't all like roses and sunshine. I mean, there were tough days too. There were definitely some tough days and some tough games, but uh, I never went into a game feeling like we didn't have a chance. I knew we always had a chance.
Yeah, a couple things I wanted to touch on is the Bob Sutton coaching tree. It's something I was gonna do a story on when I was a reporter, because you're right. There's just so many guys that during the time that Coach Sutton was there, and then you look at Coach Sutton and how he made his mark in the NFL too, and it's just like, man, there are a lot of there are a lot of coaches, yourself included. Bill Sheridan, right, is another guy
Yep.
that saw time in the NFL. I
Perry
know I'm
Fuel,
missing a bunch.
Perry Fuel,
Oh, of course,
Perry Fuel. Shoot, let me think. Ed Warner.
Sullivan, right?
Yeah, Mike Sullivan. Sully's in Pittsburgh. Ed Warner was, shoot, Ed coached at Michigan, Ohio State. Won a national championship. Um, Gosh, I mean, and then, guys like Johnny Burnett. Love Coach Burnett. Was just, again, I was a young coach, lived right around the corner from me, and on Bartlett Loop. Kind of put his arm around me, and was a mentor to me. John Seymour was a mentor to me. Those guys were, Greg Gregory. you know,
Oh yeah.
Greg was, shoot, we just, there were so many outstanding people, people and coaches that came through there.
When you mentioned, like, there weren't that many special teams coordinators in college football when you did it. There weren't that many assistant NFL special teams guys when you did it. Um,
Mhm.
I don't know. Do you feel like not that you were a pioneer, but do you feel like you were involved in something, you know, early on with you that something
Yeah,
clicked with you in special teams?
yeah. I'd tell you how what happened was my second year as a graduate assistant at University of Maine. We had a head coaching change. Tom Lichtenberg was our head coach, and he hired this guy by the name of John Baxter. Bax is still a great friend of mine. Bax he's back at Fresno now, but Bax was about my age, but here he was already a full-time coach, and he'd been a graduate assistant at Iowa State and at Arizona with Dick Tomey, and you know, Bax affected me in a very positive way because he introduced me to special teams, the importance of it, and then he got me started on the computer. And I had you know, I had my first laptop, back in, gosh, it would have been like 88, 89, and so I got to jump on things. Um, I saw the kicking game as a way to advance in the profession, but more than that, I really enjoyed coaching it because I felt like you got to work with the entire team, and there wasn't any area of the kicking game that we couldn't relate right back to offense and defense, and that was, that was it was exciting, and because when you say like kickoff coverage schemes, all right, well it's a defense, a punt return is a defense, but it's also an offensive play. Kickoff returns are offensive plays, and I still teach that way. I'll say, okay, this return is like inside zone. This is outside zone. This one's like power because we're doubling down and kicking out. So um, when you teach that way and there's carryover, I think it makes a lot more sense for the player. So I do think, I wouldn't say I was revolutionary. I think that I came along at the right time. I embraced something. Um, I studied it. I worked at it, and in a very short amount of time, was able to have a fairly good amount of success where people noticed, and then I became the teacher, where people were coming to visit me to learn, which um, I've always embraced that. I think people that are really good at what they do are not afraid to share because they know that they're continually evolving themselves, so I can share, I can share everything that I know with somebody. That doesn't mean that they're going to actually, it doesn't guarantee that they're going to go out and be able to have the same success. And then, what I know today is not going to be what I know tomorrow or next week, because I'm going to keep evolving and I'm going to keep continuing to grow and learn.
I want to get to your NFL career in a second, but first, when you talk about like passing it along, so paying it forward, so to speak, as a coach, is there anything that you either see now or anything that you saw in the past to say, okay, yeah, that was kind of something that you kind of came up with, sort of, and now it's used a lot. Forgive me for not knowing, but is there something
Um,
to that?
I think it's hard to make those claims. I mean, and I know people that would gladly do that, but I'm not one of them. I mean, I I've always looked, I think, one of the greatest advice that anybody ever gave me was coach what you know, you know, uh, coach what you know, because there's so many different ways to do things, right? And I think when people get in trouble, with not just in the kicking game, but offensively, defensively, is when they try to deviate too far from what they really are and what they know. It doesn't always have to be different. Is it can be the same but really good. I would say, players over players over scheme, match. I think one of the things that I learned very early on that served me well at West Point was, the importance of matchups. Knowing knowing it's not just a kickoff team coming at you. There's 11 individuals on there, and those 11 players have strengths and weaknesses, and just formulating a game plan to take advantage of somebody's weaknesses or neutralizing their best players. I think across the board that those things are just really, really important. But you know coaching what I see far too many people that are just trying to advance their career because they want to do something different to try to create a splash. And that's okay if it works, but ultimately it's does the team win, or what are you doing to help the team win? And that doesn't always mean running something flashy. I mean, uh, there's not a lot of the a punt play is not real sexy. I mean, neither is a kickoff coverage, or but if it's not, if the protection aspect of it isn't executed with precision and the coverage isn't executed with precision, then it's going to be flashy, but for the other team, right? So, you know, you kind of want to avoid headlines. I think a lot of times when you're a special teams guy, my wife would joke with me and she'd say, try to, good luck, honey. Try to stay off TV this week, because it's in the NFL. I mean, what happens? Like there's a bad,
Right.
so there's a breakdown, that camera goes right to that special teams coordinator, and, it's a lonely place to be. You don't want to be, that guy. So, as far as innovating, you know, I couldn't say that. I don't think I've ever been a really or tried to be like this innovative coach. I just wanted to be sound and good and try to get the right guys in the right position and doing the right things.
One, I was gonna half jokingly ask you about the swinging gate play, but I don't even want to go there, Coach. But what I wanted to ask you a little bit about is, um, now you talked about the Ron Thomas return and how that was a big play against Air Force, right? And
Mhm.
now you see so many fair catches on kickoff returns in the college game, right? I
Yeah.
was just wondering. I know it's a safety thing they're saying, right, and stuff like that, but I just wanted to maybe if you had an opinion on that. I mean, I
Well,
personally I like to see the ball get taken out a couple times here and there.
yeah.
So
Yeah, I mean, I think it kind of depends on the conference and that sort of thing. I mean, I was at Iowa State last year, and it seemed like nobody fair caught the ball. I mean, it felt like, every, there were some dynamic returners in that league last year, and felt like everybody was running the ball out. But I'm there's nothing more important to me as a football coach than the players. That's the most important thing. And so, player safety is a very real issue. It's important for not just the players, but for the future of the game. So, uh, anything that helps that, I'm in favor of. I mean, I don't have to like it, obviously, but would I, you know, do I wish we could go back to the old days? Yeah, I do, but we've also seen a lot less guys get hurt, and nobody you don't want nobody wants to see someone get hurt playing the
yeah,
game. That's you know so I think that there are issues. I think most of the rules changes that have come about recently, a lot of them uh, have affected the kicking game. And as a coach, you just got to stay flexible and keep coaching. Because even though the ball can be fair caught, you need to be prepared to cover, because there's going to be a game where, because of weather or whatever, you 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 may not get the fair catches. And I think that's for your coverage team, you don't want them to get fair cut. I call it fair catch spoiled. Where now all of a sudden they've got to go cover a kick, and they're not prepared to do it because they've been relying on the fair catches. Um, Used to get that all the time when you faced a great returner like a Devin Hester or Dante Hall or those guys. I'd be like, you're not preparing differently for this guy because you're preparing all year for these guys. Because the eventuality and the reality is that in the NFL, everybody's got somebody back there that can, if you don't cover down and if you're not detailed and you're not precise, they're going to make you pay for it. And so, you don't just change the way you coach or change the emphasis. When you have to face one of those type of players, you are building that throughout the year.
Yeah, but you look at the college game, right? And Army went so many years that 2007 was the last time a kick return or punt return went for a touchdown until last season when Tyrell Robinson took a punt back for
Yep.
Army. And it's like, man, it's like that's a long time. But now
Sure.
we're hoping that Tyrell can get back onto the field for Army and see a couple more of those before his career is over.
Yeah,
So
that'd be
now we look in the background and we see the NFL jerseys on your wall and want to get to that.
Mhm.
We should have got to there a long time ago, Coach. Apologize for that. But I know you see like Drew Brees jersey, Steve Gleason jersey up there, and so your career spanned you know, into 2 decades, right? Being
Yeah,
a special teams coordinator at the NFL level and
yeah,
started in Jacksonville, I guess, and that's right after the '98 season for Army, and then there's a
mhm.
coaching change at West Point, but I don't know if you were looking at the NFL before that. But how did I think you talked about this a little bit, but how did your chance happen in the NFL?
Yeah. I mean, it just really, again, Tim Mingy was in Jacksonville as a scout. Um, there was an opening in Jacksonville, and Coach Coughlin was looking for somebody that had a strong background in special teams, but also uh, had a very strong and proven administrative abilities. Because the job when I took it, I was basically like the chief of staff. So I was assistant special teams, but I also did all of Coach Coughlin's schedules in season, off season, training camp, and I was kind of the liaison between him and the different department heads in the facility. So, security, the equipment guys, the field, the field management, the cooks, operations, all of that stuff. And so, um, you know, Tim Mingy went up to him and said, I've got a guy for you. He's, special teams coordinator at West Point. He's also the recruiting coordinator. And the interesting thing was, when I spoke to Coach Coughlin, he made me promise him. He made me promise him that I would accept the job if he brought me on an interview. He said, "Now look, I'm not offering you the job, but he goes, if you come down here and we click, I want to know that you're going to take this thing because evidently he had gotten burnt once or twice with people using the position as leverage. So I
I got
was, excuse me, sorry about that. So I I told him, I said, Coach, if you offer me the job, I'm pretty sure I'll take it.
you, right?
And that's how it started off.
Wow. And I mean, it's from going from the Jaguars, Packers, Saints, Rams, Lions. I'm missing somebody too, and it's just like what I
There's
mean, and just like it's, I mean, when you're like you talked about, you're trying to devise ways to stop guy like Devin Hester, one of the best return men in NFL history, right? Dante
right.
Hall. I mean, that's and plus when you're first getting into it, then you're doing all the others. So that's where like the recruiting coordinator stuff really paid off for you at West Point, right? It kind
Yeah.
of helped you land
Well, I
in the
always,
NFL. So
Coach Coughlin had a reputation of being somebody that was a very hard charger. I mean, we worked long hours and that sort of thing. And we really grinded, but to me, it was like this. You guys, this is you got to understand where I just came from. I came from the land of the grind, right? I mean, nobody understands the grind more than the West Pointers, and so to me, it was just a different atmosphere, different town, different job, but the grind was no different. I don't think it was as hard as Army in a lot of ways.
Wow. Now, do you I know that in 2021 you were on the Rams staff that won the Super Bowl. Do you have fond memories or two of your NFL time, or you know?
I think my favorite NFL memory would be, this jersey right here with Steve Gleason. In 2006. I mean, I was part of Coach Payton's inaugural staff, and you know, the city, New Orleans, had been devastated by Hurricane Katrina, and so just that whole training camp. We were in Jackson, Mississippi. We didn't play a game. We didn't even set foot in the Superdome until like a couple days before that game. We went in, and just the way everything unfolded, and that kind of, we both teams, us in Atlanta, come in trying to be 3-0, and this team that the year before had been decimated by Hurricane Katrina, and I think won 2 or 3 games, ends up all the way in the NFC Championship game. And the thing that I will remember is when we were trying to fly out of Chicago, the runways where they parked the planes was frozen over. So the little like the tugboats that pull the planes out of the parking lots, the wheels were spinning. So we were delayed about 3 hours on the plane. We had just lost a chance to go to the Super Bowl, and when we landed in New Orleans I think it was 1 or 2 o'clock in the morning, there was about 10,000 fans there to greet us, after we lost the game. But so that was really, it'd be tough to beat that team and that experience, just because everything that it meant. When I took the job there, we stayed at the airport Hilton in Metairie, which is right across the street from the airport. It's about a 4-mile drive from the hotel into the facility. So, the first several months, that's the only thing you're seeing going back and forth. But you saw enough. You saw the same abandoned cars on the streets for week after week after week. Well, when Paulette finally came out and we were going to look at a home that we were buying, which was in Mandeville across the bridge, we're driving back towards the city, and you could see the Superdome. And she said, let's drive down there. Let's look at it. And it was the first time I had driven through there to see like the devastation from the storm and what it did. And, all I can tell you is when we got back to the hotel, a bunch of the coaches were in the lobby. And Paulette told them, she said, guys, when your wives come down, if they ask you to take her downtown to look at it, don't do it. Because it was just, what we saw on television, very accurate, but what you don't get is the scope of it, right? The panorama of it, like how big the area is and how, and it was in sections too, because you'd go to one block, it didn't look like anything happened. And then you'd go to, 100 yards into another block and everything's flattened. It just was, so to be a part of that rebuild, and to be a part of the rebirth of that city was really cool. And I really liked the color schemes too on the uniforms.
And that team, right? Just what that team brought back to that city, just I mean, maybe this is the reporter in me, but just like the hope, right? And just like
Mhm.
something positive in that. And you talked about maybe Steve Gleason. I think he had a block punt that like right that was a
Yes.
big play
Yeah.
for you guys. And
Yep.
I mean, wow, I can't. I mean, you just to think of you can definitely. Have you thought about writing a book, Coach?
I have. I'm open. If someone wants to help me write it, I would, I would love, because I have thought about it, and if nothing else, it would be a nice thing to be able to pass down to my kids and my grandchildren one day.
Just the stories. I mean, and we are basically just touching the surface on some of this stuff, and we're almost an hour in. And I'm like, man, I
Yeah.
told you half an hour, 45 minutes, and we can probably, I mean, there's so much
Well, I just
probably
have
more.
I'll have to come. I'll have to come back, Sal. That's all.
You know what? There's only been one part two, um, back-to-back episodes was Nate Sassaman, a year or so back, and we could probably have done a part three, but I mean, you're right there, Coach.
Nate,
A couple more quick. Oh, go ahead.
Nate's one. I love Nate. Nate Sassman is a
Man, that
stud.
guy is like
Stud.
unbelievable guy, unbelievable. And man, I gotta touch base with him. He said he'd come back once a year, and the year's already passed, so we got to get him back on. Couple quick questions. One, and then we'll wrap this up. I want to ask you for what do you think about what Army's doing special teams wise? Sean Saturnio had done a really good job with special teams.
Mhm.
Last year in the Army Navy game, that block punt into a touchdown is a game changer. It's why they
Sure.
probably won the game. Noah Short had the big play. Jabril Williams hops on it in the end zone.
Yeah.
What do you think about what he's done at West Point,
Um,
special teams wise?
I love what they're doing. I love what I love. I love everything. They're winning, and as fans of Army football, I mean, we want to see our team win. I think they've done a fantastic job. Really, really proud of what they're doing. And gosh, I mean, if I can ever help, let me know.
Well, you look at that last game that they played, right? The Army Navy game, the block punt, right? We talk about how important special teams is, and then you have those two clutch kicks by Quinn Moretsky.
Right.
One late and then one in double overtime. I mean, that's special teams was a gigantic part of that game.
Sure.
And I don't know if you've had any conversations with Coach Munkin, but he's big on special teams play, super big.
Yeah.
He's involved in it. They have periods. I think they have like 4 or 5 periods in practice every day that they go over special teams to the detail. I mean, to
Right.
like the actual like if you're a centimeter lined up the wrong way, Coach Munkin's going to tell you
Right.
off. Coach Munkin's going to tell
Well,
you, right?
that's I wasn't aware of how much time they get and all that stuff. But I mean, it doesn't surprise me with Coach Monken, and typically, especially in college football, if you see a team that's consistently week in and week out, year in and year out, that they're good in the kicking game, you can almost bet your money that the head coach is involved in some way, shape, or form. And because it starts from the top, and it's like anything else. If you don't spend the time on it, if you don't allocate the personnel, then you can't expect to be very good. So um, time and time and effort and a genuine commitment. Those are the three things that are huge. And anytime the head coach is on board and the head coach is emphasizing it, you know it's gonna get done. Because the players, they see it, they feel it, and it makes that special teams coach's job a lot easier when he's got the backing of the head coach.
I think it's helped a couple guys, Army guys, get into the NFL, right? Elijah Riley, Cole Christensen, and John Radigan.
Yep.
Those guys have spent a lot of time on special teams in the NFL, and they certainly put a lot of time in at West Point on it. So it's not like they're going in blindly and saying, "Hey, they might have took a rep here or covered a kick here or there,"
Right.
in college. Those guys were on special teams a lot for
Mhm.
um for Army in their time. Radigan especially, and man, I'm looking forward to seeing him play for the Seahawks this year. That'll be a lot of fun. Just one last one. What are you up to now? You mentioned briefly. I know you retired from coaching, right?
Yep.
Last
I,
year.
I took my NFL pension, and I am in Palm Coast, Florida, which is about an hour south of Jacksonville. And I just started a job in really late February, for beginning of March, as a business development rep for BSN Sports. And so um, Jim Slomka is literally my boss. He's the CRO for the company. Um, it's a privately held company. Did about 1.5 billion last year. We're the number one athletic apparel and equipment distributor and manufacturer in the United States. Number one partner with Nike, and both Nike and Under Armour. We have if you look at a football field, baseball diamond, basketball court, if everything other than the players and the grass, we either sell it or make it. So it's
Cool.
it is very cool. It's allowing me to kind of stay engaged. I got a chance to see Coach Sutton a couple times. Went up there for OTAs. I got to go to I'll make my way around to most of the teams this training camp just to make sure that their needs are being taken care of.
That's awesome. That's awesome. And you look at, like you talked about, Coach Sutton and Jim Slumka, two guys that we want to get on this Black Knight Nation podcast very soon. Working to get Jim and Connor on at the same time, hopefully one of these days. That would be really great.
Yeah, that
And
would
man,
be
it was really, yeah, Coach Bob, it was really great having you on today. Like we said, we're about an hour in, and we could probably go a little longer here. We could probably have to do a part two. Maybe we'll get Steve Anderson involved in a little part two. Once he becomes available. But it was really great, guys. If you're watching this, please check out our YouTube channel, Black Nation's YouTube channel. You'll see interviews like this also on. We had Jeremy Boltis on. Our last podcast was when the Army lacrosse team. That's a while back. When the Army lacrosse team was in the NCAAs, we had Jeremy Boltis on. He's one of the better lacrosse players. But we talked about Pat Work. He's been on our podcast. We talked about Ben Kotwika. He's been on the podcast. Cole Christensen before. We got to get these guys back on, but it's great to have, guys like that and you, Coach, on tonight. Thanks so much for your time, and really look forward to talking to you soon.
Thank you so much for having me, Sal. I appreciate it. It was the pleasure was all mine.